because you'll be surprised some of the positions that you worked for in the past, maybe you think that they're not really relevant to your career pursuits after UA, but we need to make sure that we are highlighting and showcasing some of those transferable skills. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. In addition to the work experience section, you can include a leadership section. Some of you are involved in different things on campus. You can also have an honor section, relevant coursework section, a project experience, or if you just want to detail skills. And we can kind of dive into whether you should include hard or soft skills, or if you wanted to kind of specify computer skills, we can dive into that a little bit more as we go along here during the chat. But I just want to kind of give you an overview of some of the traditional sections that are highlighted on a resume.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tiffany, do you have any tips to share?
Sure. So these are some things that I find frequently when working with students. I think a lot of times people know that you're going to describe your experience using bullet points, and probably you've heard to start with verbs. But I think where a lot of students I think it's easy to go with some of those vague verbs, and we generally try to get students to go with stronger verbs. So for example, instead of listing things like assisted or aided or helped, if you can say how you assisted, how you aided, generally that's going to be a stronger point for you. It's more descriptive, and it's just a stronger word, so it just looks better, catches the eye better. Because I know when I write my resume, when I say assisted, I know crystal clear what I mean by that, but the reader is left to assume, and generally they're going to assume a little bit less than more, or at least they won't get it correct because there's so much assumption that has to go in. So I think all of us kind of agree to try to avoid assisted, aided, helped, and also responsible for. You'll see that a lot of times on resumes, responsible for or responsibilities included. And that, well, first of all, isn't a verb, but also is just generally not as strong as you want it to be. So you can kind of get a little bit more clear with that. And the other thing is that I know a lot of times you see online and on Pinterest and different things, these fancy formats that look really good. And personally, I think they look neat. I feel like I'm a little bit more of a creative type that I just like the way that looks. And there is a place for some of those depending on what your major is or what your industry is. But as a general rule, and we keep hearing this from employers, like we check in and make sure we're on the right track here, that we're not just being outdated, but generally they prefer kind of the more standard traditional format, and to be maybe creative in how you word it, or that's how you'll stand out at least. So you're trying not to stand out so much from your design aspect of your resume, but more from the content aspect. And I think that kind of goes back to when a recruiter is looking at a lot of different resumes, it's easier for them to just kind of be able to know, just to be able to scan the resume and say, okay, here's the education section, here's the experience section, instead of trying to kind of look all around the page and find where it might be hidden on this particular type. So not all of them, of course, will look the same, but I think generally if they look more traditional than more graphic is what I'm trying to say with the creative resumes. Generally, again, it always depends on the situation, but generally that's going to be a little bit better option for you.
Very good. Did we want to circle back? Gail, did you think of anything else to add?
Sure. Thank you, Christy. I would like to really piggyback on what Tiffany just said. I think it's so, and Tiffany, thank you for saying it and emphasizing it. It really does depend on your industry and your major as to how the formatting of the resume needs to be. And I did check the list of student participants earlier this morning and saw that several of you are in the College of Engineering. Those fancy graphic resume formats are not appropriate in engineering, just because engineering is such a conservative industry. I also wanted to say for the engineering students in our audience, you might hear some people say, about GPA, well, if it's above a certain number, consider putting it on. If it's below, consider taking it off. And engineering students, I'm sorry, but until you launch that first job in your career, you have to put your resume, or you have to put your GPA and scale on your resume, no matter what it is. And do not ever round up on your GPA. I know engineering students take a lot of math classes and you round up in math class, but that doesn't work on the resume. I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Oh, well, sure. Like I said before, I kind of wanted to circle back and discuss a little bit more about transferable skills. I know many of you, you have diverse experiences. And so, you may wonder how working for Chick-fil-A, which is totally fine, and Chick-fil-A is awesome, by the way, just putting that out there. You may be wondering how does that relate to working in the accounting industry or, engineering or whatever your industry of choice or interest may be. We want to make sure, like Tiffany said, of course, you're going to use those bullet points to describe those experiences. And we want to make sure that you are articulating exactly what you've done and how it would translate to whatever company or industry that you're applying for. Some of the key transferable skills that I wanted to kind of go over with you are communication skills. Even if you work for Chick-fil-A, you still had to communicate with a team. So we want to make sure that we highlight that. We want to make sure that you highlight how dependable you were in your position, the fact that you exhibited teamwork and organization and adaptability and leadership. So all of those things, we want to make sure that your bullet points express all of those. And if you need assistance with that, we're always here to help.
That's very good. And before we end, again, I'm going to share my screen and show you where on our website to find all these resources. So thank you so much. Let's ask our students, what questions do you have? Are there particular things about your resume that you're wondering about?
And I know they can type in a chat, like type in the question or just ask it. Either one would be fine if they think of anything.
Yeah.
As y'all are thinking, I'll just mention one other thing that I just see that's common. This is like a tiny little tip, but I see a lot of people on their bullet points will use the word led, if they led a group or they led a session, and you just want to make sure you're spelling it the right way. That is a common mistake that I see, is that they'll spell it L-E-A-D, which does spell lead, but it's the metal. So led, the past tense of lead is L-E-D. And so that's just a little thing that spell check won't catch, but that you just want to make sure that you have accurate on there. And probably your own eyes won't catch it because you know what it's supposed to say. So it's just one little thing that I see commonly, common little mistake.
That's a good point. And I'm going to offer too, just really quickly, going off of that, when you're talking about things that you're still doing presently, a job that you're still in, you want to say managing or manage. So you're thinking mentally, I manage, I coordinate, I do whatever, but you're starting with the word manage, coordinate, lead, whatever. So you don't want it to be managing or coordinating. So that's another thing that I see frequently, is someone using a tense of the verb incorrectly. So that's one thing just to watch out for. Mm-hmm. Students, as you're looking at your own resume, does anybody struggle with having one that's too long or too short? Or are there questions that might be generated around that?
There is a question in the chat about how long it should be, and also how many past job experiences should be listed. So I'll answer the how long it should be. I think everything with resumes, you can always kind of add the caveat, it depends, because it does depend a lot on the situation, but generally speaking, especially if you're an undergraduate student or a recent graduate, probably 1 page is what you're going for. Graduate students, once you get your graduate degree, typically it's 2 pages, or depending on the situation, if you have a CV, it's longer. But generally, a recruiter, if it's for an industry type job, is looking for 1 page. Again, depending on the situation, if you know the recruiter and they tell you they want to know everything, or if it's a government job, that's longer. So there's a lot of different little caveats, but generally an industry job for like a company, and the idea being that if you're not going back real far, like to high school, probably you can get everything you need to on 1 page, just with some kind of formatting. So if you have 2 pages and you've recently graduated or you're about to graduate, a lot of times it's because there's a little bit too much spacing, or there's some stuff from high school that you probably could cut. So you're shooting for 1 page. But again, if you have questions, you can always talk with the consultant and kind of look at all of your different things that you have to consider before you submit it. And you might have different versions too of the resume, but I would try to have at least a version of a 1-page resume for most situations.
Thank you. We do have a question asking, should I list my high school information such as my accomplishments and diploma?
I'll chime in on
I'll
that.
take that one. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Did you want to take that one, or?
I'll be happy to, and we can share.
Okay.
I think the answer is it depends. Again, for freshmen and sophomore, you can have your high school accomplishments on your resume and your high school name and the month and year when you graduated. By junior year, we should be talking about what drops off from high school. And by senior year, with very few exceptions, high school should be gone. Big exceptions on a resume of a high school accomplishment would be Eagle Scout for males or the Girl Scout Gold Award for females. Those are both lifelong awards and they can remain on the resume. Most everything else is probably going to be off of the resume by the time a student is a senior.
I agree. The only caveat that I would add to that would be if it's something that you're applying for that you already have experience in and which you experienced it during high school, then yeah, I will see that. Like, I see a question here about how many past job experiences should be listed. So, say for instance, if you're applying for something in marketing and you've had several experiences in the past, you do want to present some diversity on your experiences on your resume, but I would still try to keep it within that 1-page framework. So like if you had 5 or 6 of the same experience, it's okay to add, 2 to 3 of those, but try to add some more experiences on the web. That way they'll be able to see that you're a well-rounded candidate.
Good point. And there are some different tips that we offer on our website, different resume samples that you'll be able to see where you can tell maybe when to expound upon things and when to condense things. So that might be, do any of our panelists have content to share on that when you see a need for maybe some items to be condensed into a list versus expounded upon with content?
I'll take that one. I traditionally see that when it comes to affiliations on campus, a lot of you, if you're not doing it now, you're probably going to do it later. You're going to be involved in a lot on campus. You could be doing Cobra House Connections, you could be in business fraternities or just organizations, period, on campus. And so you kind of have to condense a lot of those on your resume, especially if you didn't do much in them. It would be more valuable if you placed all of your positions or organizations where you actually held a title or you were very actively involved. But if you were just affiliated, you showed up at a meeting or two throughout the semester, I would probably list that instead of detailing that and highlighting it on your resume.
I'd like to jump back in. Also, a very effective tool can be to add the word select prior to a section title, such as work experience or volunteerism. This word select indicates to the reader that this is not a complete list. And that can be an effective way to contain your resume. And going back to what my colleague Isaiah just said, you know, pick and choose, but always keep a master document that has absolutely everything on it. Don't confuse the master document for a resume. That's your document to go back to make sure that you're capturing everything. And in fact, a lot of people are using their LinkedIn profile as that master document. Excuse me. But be sure that you hook the reader with what's most relevant to them first. I've been seeing a lot of resumes lately where students are listing their work experience high on their page, and then education is at the bottom of the page. And if they're going to be using that resume to apply for jobs that require that Bachelor of Science and something in engineering, one of the disciplines, and that needs to be high on the page, not, you know, at the bottom half.
Thank you. That's a good point. So as we're talking about the students, are there any things maybe that you think should not belong on a resume that you're wondering about?
No picture.
Good, good. That's a very good tip. Hopefully we're adhering to that. Anything else?
Another thing you generally don't want on your resume are personal pronouns. And that can be difficult when you're writing your descriptions because it's so easy. We talk in sentences, so it's easy to say things like, you know, supported my boss with a project. And really, most of the time, you can just omit those pronouns, but it's okay, and it's encouraged to just use fragments, not even a full sentence. And I'm not really sure where that rule came from, but it's pretty widely known that in resumes, you don't put personal pronouns in there. So that's something that's unique to resumes. But if anybody, like recruiters, if they're familiar with kind of resume world, that's something that will look like an error. So you want to omit those from your resume most of the time. Not all.
Excellent. Excellent, Tiffany. And then that brings me to think about periods or no periods at the end of your bullet statements. Well, some students will, going on what Tiffany said, will say, well, technically it's not a full sentence, so why would I put a period there? And other students feel that they want the closure of that period, even though it's technically not a full sentence. So the rule is just be consistent throughout your work experience section of your resume. Put periods if you like them, leave them off if you don't, but just be consistent.
And to chime off of that, that's really dependent on what kind of resume you have as well. In particular, in Culver House, for accounting majors, like it's required by your department that the periods go on the end of the bullet point. So like it really just depends on, whereas any other major, I don't think it's like that. Just based off our formats, our required departmental format. So it really just depends on your major. The accounting major specifically, and I know we have one on the phone, yes, periods at the end of your bullet point.
Thank you for that clarification, Isaiah.
Yes, and we are talking about bullet points for your descriptions, so we want to just make sure you understand that's instead of a paragraph. So instead of using like a sentence or a paragraph, you're just going to use partial sentences denoted as bullet points for these things. Good job. So I know we've had a couple of questions about high school content, about past jobs. What other questions come to your mind about maybe what you should include on your resume or not? Can anybody think? Or is there something you're trying to do to add content? Are you struggling to add content, or are you struggling to reduce the length of your resume. I know we've already heard some good tips about how to reduce it. And I think we've heard a few things about other areas of content to add. Does that spark any questions?
It sparks a comment from me, maybe not a question. And I see Jeffrey's question right here. Really quickly, I'll say that for it to be considered experience does not necessarily mean that it has to be paid. So think about that when you're trying to build content, that you may have experience volunteering with something and you think you have to put it in the volunteer section, or you have to just list it, as a one-liner on your resume because it was volunteer. If you have a section that's called work history, that typically implies more paid positions. But if it's just called experience, which is typically what you would see, then it could be volunteer, it could be classwork, as long as you indicate what your role was. And you can do that with your title. It could be volunteer, or you're instead of a company or an organization name, you have the name of the class. So you can make it clear and still use bullet points and describe it and have it in that prominent spot on your resume to go along with your experience. So keep that in mind. It does not have to be paid to be considered experience. That should help a lot with, especially as a student.
So what about, we've got a question about having some information at the top of your resume known as a profile or a summary. Is that appropriate for an undergraduate resume?
I think it's your resume. So here's the thing, is that it always is going to depend on what you want. And it's, we have these little tips and rules, but ultimately it is your document. So if you want a career profile or you want a summary, and yes, it could be either one of those, it's kind of however you want to do it. The thing is, when you think about the content, like to me, a summary would be a summary of that page that they're about to read. So if you feel like they could pretty quickly scan that document and pick out that you have a degree in this and about what your experience is, and kind of everything's tailored toward that field anyway, it may not be necessary to have it or really even all that helpful. To me, a summary is helpful when maybe you've had a variety of different kinds of experiences and they're all throughout the resume, and that summary helps sort of tie it all together and point it out. So when the reader goes through your resume, they sort of know which things to look for that is related to that position. And that kind of gets tricky, that you may want to tailor to the position anyway, but that summary might change depending on, are you applying for a position as like a recruiter at the University of Alabama, or are you going into your industry? So it sort of depends on what the situation is there. And career profile generally is the same thing, I would think. I mean, somebody else might have a different opinion on that, but typically when you see those things at the very top, like even before education, it's sort of more summary in nature. Career profile, like, I mean, if you want to say something like strong interest in, and it's something that may be a part of the job that's not necessarily a requirement, but you feel like it's supplemental enough. So I know we keep saying it always just depends, but I think you definitely can have that. I think the bigger question will be, is it necessary and is it helpful? I think that's going to depend on each kind of case by case.
Well, thank you so much for that. And we'll ask a couple of the other panelists what they think too. And how do you see that, or do you see that as different from an objective, and do you think that's necessary?
I think I'm letting somebody else.
I'll take that one. I'm sorry. Personally, I feel that the objective and a professional summary, and I may have a completely different opinion than everyone else, but I really feel that they really should be showcased through your bullet points. I agree with Tiffany in that if you if you articulate well on your bullet points, then you don't necessarily have to have that additional space showcasing a professional summary or an objective. The objective is applied because you're using that resume to apply for whatever it is, whether it's an internship or a full-time position. So I wouldn't include that. I would instead try to focus on maybe including something else that will give whomever is reviewing your resume just an inclination of how you are as a candidate So like maybe I would include like a study abroad section. That's something that's interesting that showcases something different about you. Same thing could be said about project experience. If you've done anything in one of your classes that's really relevant to the position that you're applying for, I would more than likely use that and use that space on your resume to include those compared to having an objective or professional summary.
This is Gail again. I agree with my colleagues and what has been said thus far. One thing that I see real often in engineering is that a student will write an objective statement that is so broad, it just is taking up space. So what I see quite frequently is to obtain a co-op or internship position. And when you put the or in there, it's not specific. And so that's a common mistake. Is the objective statement is optional on a resume, and it's really only effective if it really, really is tailored. So a lot of times the objective just is not used.
Thank you. Yes. So as we talk about these things, students, are there other questions that you're wondering about? We've heard Isaiah talk a little bit about categories maybe that you're not using that may be useful to use. There are some optional categories that you'll see as you look on our website, and we can possibly talk about if we have time today. He's mentioned a couple of times project work. So if you've had a class in which maybe you worked in a team, that might be a category. Sometimes you'll see a category called relevant coursework. So what do you think about those things? Are there sections on your resume that you're wondering, are they appropriate? Or is there maybe content area where you feel like yours is lacking?
And one tip related to that is to think of your resume as a tool that's going to summarize what your experience is. So I think sometimes people get kind of caught up in, do I have it the right way? Do I have the right sections and headings and that kind of thing? I mean, there are some, you definitely want an education section and you definitely want an experience section of some sort. But other than that, there are no just hard and fast, like you have to have a skills section or you have to have volunteered. If you don't, then it's just a blank on your resume. You can kind of pick and choose what you want. So like she said, if you have, some people are going to have a leadership experience section. Some people will have an abroad experience section, whether they studied abroad or just have other abroad experience. So I think it's more about get your experience on there, and then we can figure out what to call the sections instead of like have these 5 sections no matter what. So that might help you too when you're thinking about how to organize your experience, is think about what do you bring to the table, and then what are we going to call those section headings?
Thank you for that. And we've also got a good question with someone asking, should I list all of my previous job experiences or only the ones that are considered more relevant toward the career that he's looking to pursue? And I think Isaiah, you mentioned this a little bit about Chick-fil-A. So let's talk about that. We've also got a question from someone asking what categories are the most important. So let's talk about those.
I'll jump in. I think, going back to Isaiah's example earlier about Chick-fil-A, when I see that on a resume, I know that that person has had some of the best customer service training in the world. And as you all know now, I work mostly with engineering students and employers and faculty. And to see that an engineering student had that great customer service training and practice that on the job, that just speaks volumes to recruiters.
That's a good point, especially possibly in an industry where more technical skills are showcased. Isaiah, did you have anything to weigh in about those experiences or particular categories that you feel are most important?
Sure. I can definitely speak to the categories. Personally, I think every recruiter wants to see how well-rounded a candidate is. So I would try to include definitely some work experiences, and if you don't have any of those, definitely some leadership experiences, some activities you're involved with or involvement that you've had on campus or off campus for that matter. I would definitely include relevant coursework because let's say, I hate to pick on my accounting major, but just say, for instance, we are applying for a position in accounting and we don't necessarily have a lot of accounting experience, but we do have experience in other things. So I would add that relevant coursework section just because it'll give employers a feel for what you know. And once they're able to see at least what you've been exposed to, then hopefully they'll say, okay, well, maybe she, or he doesn't have experience in X, but I see they've taken courses in Y and Z. So they should be able to easily translate. And that's what I think is more valuable on your resume.
Thank you. Someone else has asked, is there ever a time when it's okay to list extracurricular activities or work experience in order of relevancy rather than in chronological order?
Yes, if you get creative on how you do this. So if you list dates with your experience, it's really supposed to be in reverse chronological order. So if there are dates included in your section, in experience, there always will be. Under the experience heading, that's gonna be part of the content of that section. And so when you do that, it really needs to be in order of most recent to least recent. However, if you have something kind of in the middle and you think this is the one I really want to highlight, you can always pull that section out and call it something different. So you could go with relevant experience and separate relevant from something else. Or if you have something that is like speech related experience or leadership experience we talked about. So you can always sort of separate it out that way. Another option is if you have, like you're talking about with extracurricular activities, you don't have to list the dates. At least that's my opinion. You'll get a little different experience or answers from different people probably. But if you don't list the dates in that section and they're just listed, then you can list them however you want to because you don't have the dates there for them to even know what's the order. So yes, I think there is a way that you can do that. That might be something that you feel like you want to come in and have somebody look at it and just sort of double check, does this look misleading or does it look like it's wrong? But I think that there is a way to do that. And I think we missed one question that you do not have to list all of your previous job experiences. So the resume is, earlier Gail was talking about keep that master copy, that master document that you just pick and choose from. And so that way, let's say that you're applying for a leadership position on campus and you have a lot of experience that's very technical to your field, but people for this position they're not really going to need to know all of that. So you can kind of pick and choose for your resume what information you put on there. And generally people are not going to assume that's everything you've ever had. They think that is tailored for that particular position. So then if they want to know more, they could go to LinkedIn and see more information. Or like Gail said, you could use select experience or select leadership roles or something like that to indicate that there's more to it. But yeah, you definitely tailor for that position. You don't have to put everything on there.
And Tiffany, when students put select experience or select leadership, a lot of times that can really serve to their benefit because if the recruiter likes what he or she sees, then they may contact the student and ask them, well, what else is there?
Right.
And now they have an interview.
Yeah. Make sure there is something else before you put that on there.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Well, all of this is very true because it is the point of our resume to try to get us to that next step, which should be an interview. And it's more important now than ever before that we have this document that represents us well on paper, because more than ever, that's what people are going to see about you first is what's on paper. So We do want to leverage this document to try to advance ourselves in an interview process. If there are no other questions at the moment, I'm going to take a pause here and share my screen and show you some resources on our website. We can still talk and chime in along the way. In fact, if someone wants to do that while I'm pulling that up, if you have any tips around that. I know I saw a question about objectives. I hope we did answer that for you, Lauren, about if you do have an objective, should it be the same? And I think we've heard that everyone agrees that an objective is probably not the best use of space, since you are using that document for whatever it is you're applying for. So if you're applying to a particular internship, that is your objective, etc. So with that master resume, that's the first thing here on number 1, making a list. That's talking about that master resume. We've talked a little bit about the transferable skills and different headings and bullets. So I think this would be helpful for many of you who want to compare this to what you have. Notice at the very bottom, if any of you would like to make use of some of our samples, we have them all here as Word documents. So if maybe you are using a template right now that has some color and a picture and other things that now you're rethinking, please feel free to go and find these sample resumes where you can review content and decide, are there things on here? For instance, commerce and business, Isaiah has talked about this one and topics on it like project work, relevant coursework, things like that. Tiffany has talked about some things that we'll see on the arts and sciences resume, having sections divided out by relevant experience. And that might be internships or things like that you want to emphasize. And then you'll see another category called additional experience, where maybe you just want to talk about different jobs that you've had, but maybe not have bullets on them, for instance. Do our panelists have anything to weigh in about this?
Can you scroll a little bit further down? Let's see. Where it talks about writing the, on number 4, sorry. If you'll go to number 4, writing bullet points. This is probably the most difficult part of writing a resume, other than formatting issues. Sometimes that can give you fits, and those Word documents there, if you don't already have a resume, those will be really helpful. But writing the bullet points are the part that is probably the most important and the most difficult when you're getting started. Because again, when you're the writer and you write a little blurb about what you did, you lived it, so you understand what it is. But for the reader, and that's where when you come to the Career Center, we can kind of question you and make sure it's clear. That do you see where they say in there exceeded sales goals by 10% or more? Like if you can get that quantifiable information in there and you can think more results oriented and big picture, like what did you accomplish? That seems intimidating to write, but usually there are some things that you can include in there that show not just what you did, but how you did it. So for instance, if you were promoted to a training position within 2 months of hire or something like that, and that might not even be something that you did daily, but it was an accomplishment, and you can put that as a bullet point. So those are the things that when you're looking at your experience, whether it's paid, volunteer, whatever, if you're thinking more, how do I quantify this with some numbers or percentages, and how do I show results in it? That's where I feel like a consultant can kind of help, like, what did you ever train anybody in these roles, or what did your boss say about it when you finished this? Oh, well, they wanted to publish it, or, you know, like they invited me to work with them on their research. Those kinds of things you really want to make sure that you're getting across on paper, because again, you're going to be seen on paper, at least at first, and it just needs to be able to come through to give you the most credit. And so again, I just think that will help that section right there, number 4, number 2, different ones like that, but also a person working with you that knows resumes and can kind of pull some of that information out will, I think, really be to your benefit.
That is true.
And I'll just, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make mention of that, and it is your resume. So the point of your resume is presenting your background in a way that is the most effective so that it can get you to that next step. Go ahead, Isaiah.
I was just going to chime in and segue off of Tiffany. Take advantage of us. I mean, we're always here to help. If you have any questions regarding, you know, how to develop your bullet points, how to, you know, what needs to go where, do I want to place an emphasis on one thing over the other, like, we're always here to help. You can schedule an appointment via handshake for a resume review at any point. So just make sure that you're taking advantage of us as resources here on campus.
And you'll notice while we're here, anywhere we are on our webpage, whether you are our website, if you're at home, if you're at Explore, if you're at Develop, wherever you are on our website, you can always scroll to the very bottom and select Make an Appointment, Schedule it, and Handshake, and it's going to walk you through. When you choose that, it's going to ask you, what can I help you with? It's going to show you a drop-down menu where you can select resume, internship, whatever it is. And it's going to guide you through making that appointment. It will give you all of our available dates and times that we're available to meet with you about your resume. So yes, I agree with Isaiah. Do take advantage, especially here we are in summer. It's a little bit of a downtime, so we have time to really work with you and concentrate and help you to make that resume the best it possibly can be. And so I encourage everyone just to familiarize yourself with this. Notice all of the good content we have about not only resumes, but other things. One thing I was thinking about as we talked about that summary, sometimes that's content people will include in a cover letter. Instead of putting it on the resume in a summary or a profile, they'll put that type of content in a cover letter. So we have a lot of things that you can go back and look at. And again, anywhere you are, you can go to the very bottom and schedule an appointment to meet with any of us. What questions, can anybody think of anything else that you're wondering about, that you were thinking about as it relates to your own resume, that you'd like to ask in our time that we have remaining? Or any advice from our panelists of things that you would want to close with?
I'll make a kind of a summary statement. Students, there's no limit to how many times you can use the Career Center. And it's really, really sad when somebody gets really close to graduation and they've never used our services and they've applied for a large number of opportunities and didn't even make it to the interview stage. So please, there's no dishonor in reaching out and allowing us to assist you, and just really encourage you to do that.
Even when you're an alum, so keep that in mind too, that we work with alumni as well. So if you're close to graduating, you don't have to just hurry until you reach your graduation month and then our services stop. We will also work with alumni as well.
Mm-hmm.
Any other closing thoughts from our panelists, or any other final questions from from those of you who are joining us today. Even those of you who are on our staff who are not panelists, if you can think of anything that you would like to weigh in with, we are welcoming of any advice you want to share. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation. And again, please take advantage. We've got different resources. I think I showed you on our website. You'll be able to see as well. When you go there, you'll be able to see where you should go. So for those of you in engineering, you'll be able to see the building where your services are housed. Those of you in business, you'll see that your connection is Bidgood Hall. So we've got a lot of different resources. Many of us are in Ferguson. We're going to continue with Zoom appointments all the way probably through the end of the summer and beyond. So do take advantage. We're eager to hear from you, and we appreciate you for joining us today. And with that, if no one has anything else, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad it's been helpful. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too.